The last fundamental piece of JavaScript functions that we have yet to cover is the return keyword. So this video is going to focus on conceptually what the return keyword is, and then also how do we write functions that use it. So I like to imagine that functions are a machine. We write a function and it takes some inputs, and those would be the arguments, and it does something with those inputs, does math, it checks if a user is logged in, it adds to a score, and then it returns something at the end. There is an output that it sends back. So far, our functions have only taken inputs, and they actually haven't sent anything back. So I'll show you what I mean. If we have a function called square, which we saw in the last lesson, and square took an input, let's just call it x, and all that we did inside was console.log x times x. If I run square and I pass in a number, like 4, I see the number 16 here. So it looks like I do have an output. What I actually have is something being printed to the console with console.log. But I don't actually have something that is being returned. So there's a really big difference. If I use the return keyword, it means that I can capture the value that is coming back out of the function. Right now I can't capture it. So console.log just prints it to the console, so only a developer would ever see that anyways, and I can't use it in any other part of my code. So let's say I wanted to do something where I had a line that was like 4 squared is, and then I wanted to put whatever comes back from square 4, so something like this. I wanted to put these together. So 4 squared is plus square of 4. Right now, if I do that, it just tells me 4 squared is undefined. And that's because nothing is being returned. We're missing this output. So even though it prints something, it doesn't actually last. It doesn't send anything out. So to do that, we use the return keyword. So it's a really simple change. We're just going to go back, and instead of console.logging, I'm just going to write return. So the return keyword is going to return one thing per function. We could theoretically have multiple return statements, but only the first one is actually going to run. Unless we had some sort of if statement where inside of an if statement we returned one thing, and inside of the else we returned something else. But still, only one of those is ever going to actually return. So in this case, we're returning x times x. So if I run this now, square of 4, you can see that it shows me 16, but it's slightly different than before the way that it printed 16. You'll see this little arrow here, and that tells me that it's a return value. So if I just console.log something on its own, like console.log 4, it prints number 4, but right below it you can see there's a return value, and console.log actually returns undefined. So that explains why we've been seeing so many undefineds. If you've been wondering what that is, I've held off on explaining it until we've gotten to the return keyword. So every function returns something, and if we don't explicitly tell it what to return, it just returns undefined. So up here, we had our square function, and when we would run it, it returned undefined. Even though it printed 16, it still returned undefined. So to use the value now to capture the output of square of 4, if I want to use that somewhere else, I can call back this line that looks like this. 4 squared is plus square of 4, and this is going to run. It's going to pass 4 in, it's going to multiply x times x, 16, and then return 16. It's going to send it out of the function and put it right here. And so we get 4 squared is 16. The other thing I can do with the return keyword is save it in a variable. So I could do something like this. var result equals square of 104. And now if I look at results, I get 10,816. So this function call, square of 104, was evaluated. That returned 10,816, which was then stored in result. So I have another example of a function that returns something. It's called capitalize, and it takes in a string like the word Paris. And what it does is it capitalizes the first letter and returns the entire string with that first letter capitalized. So Paris turns into Paris with a capital P. So the whole point of this function is that it alters our original data a little bit. So we pass in string, and then we get back a version of the string that has the first letter capitalized. The logic of how it actually capitalizes the first letter is not what I want to emphasize here. What I do want to emphasize is this right here. I have a variable city, which is Paris, lowercase p, and then I'm capitalizing it, capitalized city, and saving the return value to a new variable. So this is something we'll do a lot. We'll run a function, save the return value to a variable so we can use it again somewhere else. So if you are wondering how this function does work, the first part takes the first letter, so the character at index 0, and it uppercases it. So that would give us uppercase P. And then string.slice takes a number, in this case 1. And so that takes everything from index 1 onwards, ARIS, all lowercase, and it smashes that together with the plus sign with the capital P. So we're capitalizing the first letter and then taking everything else that's after the first character and combining the two and returning that. So another aspect of the return keyword is that it stops the execution of a function. So as soon as we return something, the function is done. So the whole point of a function is that it takes some sort of input and then it returns something. So as soon as it returns, that's just the end of the function's execution. So here's an example. This is the same capitalized function, except with a small difference. And this is checking if we pass in a number instead of a string, which is what this line does. If type of input is equal to number, then let's just return that's not a string. We don't want to bother with any of this. So this return, if we pass in a number, will short circuit and this code never runs. Even though there is no else statement, so this code should run, it actually doesn't run at all because this short circuits it if we pass in a number. Otherwise, if we pass in a string like Paris, this isn't true, so this return statement is never run, and then this return statement is run. So the very last thing that I want to just add on at the end here is that there are two different syntaxes for declaring a function. And the first one is what we've been using. It's called a function declaration. So we write function and then the name of our function, and then we pass any arguments in, and we write our function body inside of the two brackets. There's another way of writing a function called a function expression. And the way that we do that is we actually write a variable, capitalize, and we set that equal to a function. So these are two ways of defining equivalent functions. This is a declaration, and this is an expression. So there is one small difference, which is if I declare a function this way, var capitalize equals function, if I just decided to change capitalize to be equal to the number 10 or the number 15, my function is lost. So I'll show you what I mean. So I'm going to declare a function var say hi is equal to a function, and all that my function does is console.log hello, just like that. And so I can call say hi in the exact same way as the function declarations that we've seen, but I can also decide that say hi is now equal to 34. And now if I refer to say hi, I can't evaluate it, I can't run it as a function anymore. As we progress through the class, we will use declarations and expressions, and we'll also talk more about why you would use one over the other.